He did not come here with an intention. That becomes clear to him only after he has already arrived. There was no clear reason that pushed him upward, no question demanding an answer, no moment that required distance. Some places do not ask why you are there. They do not need justification. They simply allow you to be present without explanation. The path upward had been steady, not difficult, not easy, just consistent. Each step existed on its own, without needing to connect to the next. His body understood the rhythm long before his thoughts tried to define it. As he climbed, he noticed how little he was carrying, not in his hands, but elsewhere. Thoughts that usually accompanied him closely seemed to fall slightly behind, not pushed away, not rejected. They simply did not keep up. At a certain height, effort changed into movement, and movement changed into something quieter. There was no moment of arrival, no signal that said now, just a gradual absence of urgency. When he finally sat down, it felt less like a decision and more like a response, as if the place itself suggested stillness. His body settled before his mind did. Muscles released without instruction. His shoulders did not drop dramatically. They simply stopped holding something unnecessary. Below, everything insists on attention. Sound competes with sound. Movement interrupts movement. Even rest often feels like a task to complete, as if calm must be earned or explained. Up here, nothing requires participation. The air does not ask to be noticed. The clouds do not perform. The landscape does not wait for approval. He realizes he is not observing in the usual way. He is not scanning, not searching, not labeling what he sees. His eyes move slowly, without expectation. Time behaves differently, not slower, not faster, just less insistent. Minutes do not announce themselves. They do not demand to be used. His breathing adjusts on its own. There is no conscious effort to deepen it, no attempt to relax. The body recognizes the absence of demand and responds accordingly. For a moment, he expects a thought to appear that explains everything, a conclusion, a realization worth keeping. But nothing like that comes. Instead, there is a soft emptiness, not hollow, not lacking, just unoccupied. He notices how unfamiliar that feels, not unpleasant, just rare. Usually silence triggers activity, plans, memories, mental lists that assemble themselves automatically. Here, silence remains silence. Thoughts do arrive, but they do not rush forward. They move slowly like objects drifting in water. They appear, linger briefly, and then move on. He does not follow them. There is no need. Below, he often feels responsible for momentum, as if stopping would cause something to fall apart, as if presence must always justify itself through action. Here, presence requires nothing. It does not need to produce. It does not need to explain. He feels no urge to check time, no curiosity about how long he has been sitting. Duration has no value here. The view does not overwhelm him. It does not demand awe. It does not insist on admiration. It simply exists, unconcerned with his reaction. He realizes that he is not separate from this moment, but he is also not central to it. And that balance feels strangely relieving. There is comfort in not being necessary, in knowing that everything continues without needing his input. He thinks about how often he tries to be useful, how often he measures his presence by what it adds. Here, nothing is added, nothing is taken away. The absence of pressure becomes noticeable, like the moment after a sound stops ringing. Not silence as an event, but silence as a condition. He sits with it, not actively, not passively, just there. The world below feels distant, but not because of space, because of relevance. For now, it does not ask anything of him. This is not escape. He understands that clearly. Escape requires resistance. This feels like permission. He does not feel improved. He does not feel transformed. Nothing dramatic occurs. And that somehow is the point. Being here does not solve anything. It does not promise clarity. It does not offer direction. It simply removes the need to respond. And in that removal, something settles. He remains seated, not waiting for the moment to end, but not trying to extend it either. Time does not move forward here. It rests alongside him. For now, this is enough. At some point, the stillness begins to change, not suddenly, not noticeably. It does not announce itself. It simply deepens. What was first an absence slowly becomes a presence of a different kind. Not something added, but something uncovered. When nothing asks for attention, attention softens. It no longer points outward. It no longer scans for relevance. It rests. He notices this without naming it, without trying to hold on to it. The shift happens quietly, almost behind him. Thoughts begin to arrive in a different way, not as interruptions, but as visitors. They do not push forward. They do not insist on being finished. They come without urgency, without expectation. He becomes aware of how rarely this happens, how often his thoughts are driven by the need to conclude, to decide, to move forward. Here, nothing needs resolution. A memory appears, not a strong one, not emotional, just present. It lingers briefly, then fades. He does not follow it. There is no reason to. Another thought surfaces, something unfinished, something left open. Normally, that would tighten his attention. It would ask to be addressed. Here, it does not. It simply exists alongside everything else. The absence of demand changes how thoughts behave. They lose their sharp edges. They stop pulling. They become softer, more spacious. He realizes how much effort he usually spends managing his own mind, redirecting, filtering, correcting. Here, none of that is necessary. Silence holds everything evenly. Nothing is prioritized. Nothing is excluded. Time continues, but without emphasis. Moments do not stack. They do not rush towards something else. He becomes aware of his body again, not in parts, not as tension or release, just as weight, as contact. The ground beneath him is steady. It does not react. It does not respond. It simply supports. There is comfort in that simplicity. He notices how often he is usually preparing for the next interaction, the next responsibility, the next moment that requires him to be ready. Here, readiness dissolves. There is nothing to anticipate. The future loosens its hold, not because it disappears, but because it stops being relevant. This moment does not lead anywhere. It does not promise a next step. It exists on its own. That realization does not excite him. It calms him. He becomes aware of a subtle habit, the urge to make this moment meaningful, to turn it into something useful later, a reference point, a lesson. He lets that habit pass. Not everything needs to be carried forward. The space around him feels unchanged, yet his relationship to it shifts. He is no longer watching. He is simply there. The horizon does not pull his attention outward. It does not suggest distance or possibility. It rests like everything else. He notices that he has stopped narrating internally. There is no commentary, no interpretation layered over experience, just sensation, just presence. This is not clarity in the usual sense. There is no insight arriving, no understanding forming. It is clarity without content, awareness without focus. He realizes how rarely he allows this, how often he fills space before it has time to settle. Below, space rarely remains empty. Silence is often interrupted. Gaps are quickly closed. Here, gaps are left alone. There is a feeling that might be described as relief, but it is quieter than that, less defined. It is the relief of not having to respond. He thinks briefly about returning, not with resistance, not with urgency, just as a distant idea. He knows he will go back. This place does not replace anything. It does not compete with his life. It simply offers a pause without instruction. The thought of leaving does not disturb the moment. It exists without pressure, like everything else. He remains seated, allowing the stillness to continue unfolding. There is no goal in staying longer, no achievement in duration. Time remains neutral. He becomes aware of how complete this moment is without needing recognition, without being shared, without being remembered. Some experiences are not diminished by being temporary. They are defined by it. He feels no urgency to absorb this, no fear of losing it. It does not belong to him, and that makes it lighter. The stillness does not deepen further. It does not need to. It has reached its own balance. Nothing new emerges, and nothing is missing. For now, that is enough. There is a subtle shift that happens after a while, not in the place, but in how he occupies it. At first, he arrived as someone, not consciously, but by habit, a person with a history, with preferences, with things waiting elsewhere. Now that sense of being someone begins to loosen, not disappear, just soften. He notices how little of himself is required here. No name is needed, no explanation, no context. Below, identity is constantly reinforced through interaction, through reaction, through being seen and answered. Here, there is no mirror. He does not feel erased by this. He feels unburdened. There is no role to perform, no tone to adjust, no version of himself that needs to be appropriate. The absence of audience changes everything. He becomes aware of how often he usually monitors himself, how he speaks, how he appears, how his presence lands. Here, there is nothing to land on. His posture changes slightly, not dramatically, just enough to reflect that nothing is expected of it. No alertness, no readiness. He realizes that much of his tension elsewhere comes not from difficulty, but from continuity, from never fully stepping out of engagement. This place does not require disengagement. It simply does not engage. There is a quiet permission in that. He thinks about the word useful, how often it frames his sense of worth, how presence is measured by contribution, by output, by response. Here, usefulness has no meaning. Nothing here needs him. That thought might sound unsettling, but it is not. It is strangely kind. To exist without being necessary feels lighter than expected. He notices that his thoughts no longer refer back to himself as often. There is less I, less internal positioning. Experience unfolds without commentary. This is not detachment. He does not feel removed. If anything, he feels more immediate, less filtered. He becomes aware of how much energy he usually spends maintaining coherence, keeping his life aligned, holding together multiple threads. Here, there is only one thread, and it does not need to be held. The simplicity is not boring, it is complete. He senses how rare it is to be present without agenda, without improvement, without even the intention to rest. Rest happens as a side effect, not a goal. He remains still but not rigid. Stillness here is not frozen, it is fluid, adjusting without effort. He notices small details without focusing on them. Light shifting slightly, air moving across his face. Nothing demands attention, yet everything is available. He realizes that being without a role does not make him smaller. It makes him more spacious. There is room to breathe around thoughts, room between sensations. He is not preparing for the next moment. He is not reflecting on the last one. This moment does not sit between others. It stands alone. The concept of productivity feels distant, not rejected, just irrelevant. He understands now why silence can feel uncomfortable elsewhere. It removes roles. It exposes how much of identity depends on interaction. Here, silence does not expose. It shelters. He does not feel watched by time. Minutes do not tick. They pass without sound. There is no internal pressure to mark this moment as meaningful or important. It does not need to justify itself. He becomes aware that he is not trying to remember this, not trying to store it. Memory is not required. The experience exists fully without needing to be carried forward. This absence of narrative feels freeing. He is not having an experience. He is simply here. He considers how rare it is to let life happen without immediately turning it into something. Here, nothing becomes anything else. There is a quiet dignity in that. Eventually, a thought appears about leaving, not urgent, not pressing, just a gentle awareness that this moment will end. The thought does not disrupt anything. It does not diminish the present. Leaving will not undo what is happening now, because nothing here needs to be preserved. He remains seated, comfortable with the openness, comfortable with not knowing how long this will last. There is no desire to conclude, no sense of completion waiting ahead, just presence without position. For now, that is enough. At some point, the awareness of leaving becomes clearer, not as a decision, but as a quiet fact. The moment does not end suddenly, it thins. Like mist lifting without announcing itself, nothing breaks, nothing interrupts. He notices that he is still seated, but the stillness has changed its texture. Not less calm, just different, as if the moment is slowly releasing him without pushing. The idea of returning does not feel heavy. It does not undo what has happened, because nothing here depends on staying. This place was never meant to hold him. It does not claim ownership. It does not ask for loyalty. He understands now that this matters, that rest which demands permanence is not rest, that peace which must be protected creates its own tension. What he experienced here did not arrive because he stayed long enough, and it will not disappear because he leaves. He shifts his weight slightly. The movement is small, almost unnoticeable, but it signals something. His body remembers the world below, not with resistance, not with eagerness, just recognition. The sounds return gradually, not actual sounds, but the memory of them. Traffic, voices, the layered hum of movement and intention. He does not brace himself. There is no need. He notices something important. He is not preparing to explain this moment, not to himself, not to anyone else. There is no story to bring back, no insight that needs to be shared, no lesson waiting to be applied. This was not a resource. It was not fuel. It was not a strategy. It was simply time that did not ask to be used. He stands slowly, not ceremoniously, not carefully, just enough to feel the shift in balance. Standing does not feel like interruption. It feels like continuation in another form. The view does not change dramatically. The clouds remain where they were. The distance remains distant. Nothing marks the transition. And that feels appropriate. He takes a step, then another. The body resumes movement without instruction. As he begins to descend, he notices that nothing pulls at him. No urgency to return, no regret for leaving. This is not something that can be lost, because it was never something he possessed. He realizes that much of what feels heavy in life comes from the idea that we must carry every experience forward, that moments only matter if they become something else. This one does not. It exists fully without needing to echo. As he walks, his thoughts remain quiet, not empty, just unoccupied. There is space between them now. Space that was not created, only revealed. He knows the world below will resume its rhythm. He will speak again, respond again, decide again. Nothing here has changed that. But something subtle remains, not an insight, not a shift in identity, just the memory of a state in which nothing was required. He does not promise himself to return to this place. He does not make it a goal. Goals would distort it. He understands now that this was never about location. Not really. Height was only a condition. Silence only a setting. What mattered was the permission to stop carrying. That permission does not belong to this place alone. It exists quietly, in pauses between moments, in breaths that are not optimized, in spaces where nothing needs to be improved. He does not hold on to that thought. Holding would turn it into something else. He lets it remain implicit. The descent continues. Steps find their rhythm again. The body knows how to re-enter movement. The world below becomes clearer, more defined, more immediate, and still something feels lighter. Not removed, not solved, just less tightly held. He reaches a point where the height no longer separates, where the distance closes. There is no final glance backward, no symbolic moment. The experience does not need to be honored. It does not require acknowledgement. It has already completed itself. He continues walking, back into sound, back into interaction, back into time, but not as someone who lost something, as someone who knows that moments of nothing are not empty. They do not need to be repeated. They do not need to be remembered clearly. They leave no trace, and yet they change the weight of things. He does not carry this moment with him. And because of that, it remains intact.